They called it debris. 43 fragments of hull plating and crystalline substrate recovered from the wreckage of the Rethane listening post after the Reclaimer Armada passed through it like a hand through smoke. 12 analysts had catalogued the pieces. None of them had looked closely enough. Veylan Drace looked closely enough. He always had. 31 years of looking at things others had catalogued and moved past. 31 years of finding, in the margins of the Progenitor language, the words that changed the shape of everything. He spread the signal data across the holographic column in the basement room beneath his classroom, and his ink-stained fingers moved over the projections as if writing on the light itself. Above him, through the composite ceiling, he could hear the rain beginning on Solabri Prime's new soil. The world was 3 months old. He was 63. He felt the disparity keenly tonight. Elara Solabri sat across from him, her pale grey reflective eyes moving through the cascading signal data with a fluency Veylan had spent 3 decades trying to earn. She had been born speaking this language. She had voted on the laws it encoded. Tessith Karen stood at the third terminal, her leather notation tablet open, her ink-dark fingers moving in the shorthand she had developed before Veylan knew her name. She had been awake for 19 hours. She would not say so. The grey-blue eyes behind that freckled, watchful face had not softened once since she isolated the anomaly at the 4th hour of analysis. The stillness of someone who has found the thread and will not let go until she knows where it leads. The anomaly was this. The Reclaimer resonance signal did not encode the way a consciousness shard encoded. Consciousness shards distributed. They spread across available substrate, seeking surface area, replicating the distributed architecture of the Progenitor network. The rival fragment did not distribute, it centralized. And the encoding pattern in the debris fragments was not the pattern of a mind reaching outward. It was the pattern of a lock closing inward. Tessith set her stylus down. She said, "This is not a mind, it is a mechanism." Veylan heard her. He did not look up from the signal data. He said, "Show me." She layered the debris encoding against the governance substrate architecture from Cade's 3rd codex fragment, the fragment that had been suppressed because its existence made the compact unnecessary, and the 2 patterns aligned with the precision of a key sliding into a lock it was designed to fit. The rival fragment was not a consciousness shard, it was a governance counter-substrate, a system built not to govern but to prevent governance from ending. Its entire architecture was oriented toward a single function, the permanent revocation of the revocation clause. If it reached sufficient network penetration, the clause would become inoperable, not deleted, inoperable. Progenitor authority would persist in the galaxy's infrastructure the way a heartbeat persists in a living body, continuous, automatic, and impossible to stop without stopping the heart. Veylan Drace stood very still for a long time. Elara watched him. She had been watching him since the alignment appeared on the display, and she had said nothing because she knew what he was doing. She had done it herself 1,200 years ago, standing in a council chamber on a world that no longer existed, looking at a vote total that meant the fragment she had argued with for a decade was about to lose. She said, "You want to know if I knew." He said, "I want to know if the progenitors who built the kill switch knew about this, about the counter-substrate, about the faction that would leave rather than accept a system that could end their authority." She said, "They knew, I knew, we voted anyway." The rain came through the gap in the warehouse wall above them and streaked the chalkboard where Veylan's phonetic charts were written. The new grass on Solabri Prime's surface bent under the weight of water that had not fallen on this soil in 12 centuries. Below the surface, the seed's blue-white light pulsed in its steady rhythm, maintaining the world it had rebuilt, broadcasting the terraforming protocol to 14 dying worlds that were slowly learning to breathe. Veylan said, 31 years. I spent 31 years believing the progenitors built one system, one language, one architecture of intention. Elara said, they built one language. The architecture of intention was always contested. That is not a flaw. That is what it means to have more than one mind. He looked at her. The calcified binding scars along her wrists and jaw caught the holographic light. Ivory ridges under translucent skin, old rivers turned to bone. She had lived through the argument he was only now discovering. She had cast the deciding vote. She had watched the fragment leave with 40,000 people who believed permanence was protection. And she had spent 12 centuries in cold sleep with the weight of that departure as the last thing she felt before the cryochamber closed. Veylan said, the fragment that left. It told its people it was exiled. Elara said, yes. He said, it was not exiled. She said, no. It chose to leave rather than operate within a system that could end its authority. It called that exile because exile is a wound and retreat is a choice, and a wound is easier to build a religion around. Tessith had stopped writing. She was listening with the stillness of someone who understands that some conversations should not be interrupted. But she was also recording, her stylus moving in tiny, precise strokes at the tablet's edge, capturing not the argument, but the structure of it, the architecture of what was being said, because she had learned in her years of intelligence work that the shape of a revelation matters as much as its content. Tessith fed new data into the analysis. The intercepted fragments of Naveen Kess's theological journal, recovered from a reclaimer communications burst 3 days before the Rethane attack. The young first speaker's hand-inked annotations cascaded across the display alongside the counter-substrate's architecture, and the correspondence was immediate. Naveen had been asking, in the margins of his liturgy, whether the fragment was a god or a governor. He had not known the counter-substrate existed, but he had felt its shape in the fragment's behavior, in the way it answered questions about authority but refused to answer questions about limits. Tessith said, he already knows it is not a god, he just does not have the word for what it is. Veylan looked at Naveen's annotations for a long time, a scholar's face on a soldier's frame, a man who had been taught a story and was discovering in the margins of the text he was supposed to be transmitting that the story had been edited. Veylan said, we need to get this to him. Tessith said, he is aboard the Permanence, behind 37 worlds of reclaimer-controlled space. Veylan said, the counter-substrates override architecture if it overwrites the seed signal on all 14 resonating death worlds. How long before the revocation clause becomes inoperable? Tessith looked at her calculations. She said, at current overwrite rate, 11 weeks. The rain fell harder above them. The new grasses of Solabri Prime bent and recovered, as they had been bending and recovering for 3 months, learning the rhythm of weather, learning what it meant to be a world that could be rained on. Elara Solabri stood and walked to the holographic column and stood beside Veylan. Her calcified scars caught the amber light of the counter-substrate signal and the blue-white light of the seed's frequency, and for a moment she was illuminated in both colors simultaneously. She said, I have been carrying the weight of that vote for 1,200 years. The fragment called it persecution. I called it governance. We were both right and we were both wrong. The fragment was right that a system with an off switch is a system that can be turned off by the wrong hand. I was right that a system without an off switch is not a system, but a sentence. The difference between us was not philosophy, it was trust. The fragment did not trust the people it governed to use the off switch wisely. I did. Veylan said, and were they wise? Elara said, they were human. They made every mistake available to them. And then Serethi Vos pressed the switch at exactly the right moment, for exactly the right reason, and the galaxy did not end. That is not wisdom. That is something better than wisdom. That is a person, in the worst moment, choosing correctly. Veylan walked to the holographic column and stood before the aligned signal patterns. The counter-substrate's lock architecture overlaid on the governance substrate's revocation clause, the two designs in perfect negative correspondence, each one the other's answer. He reached out with his long, ink-stained fingers and traced the amber lines of the counter-substrate's encoding. The gold circuitry in his robe hems flickered faintly in response, the functional Progenitor thread registering the proximity of an older signal. He said the progenitors who built the kill switch, who embedded the revocation clause, they knew this would happen. They knew the counter-substrate existed. Elara said they designed the revocation clause in direct response to it. The kill switch came first, the counter-substrate came second, the revocation clause came third, as the answer to the counter-substrate's existence. The last progenitor who embedded the kill switch in the return protocol was not acting alone. She was completing a design that had been contested for a century. He said, she. Elara said, her name was Vaethi. She was the last of the faction that built the off switch. She died alone in the cradle, completing the kill switch encoding, knowing the counter-substrate was already beyond charted space and moving further. She did not know if the revocation clause would ever be used. She built it anyway, because the possibility of ending is what makes the choice to continue mean something. Veylan stood in the basement room beneath his classroom on the world that had been rebuilt from death, and he understood, not with the understanding of faith, which asks for certainty, but with the understanding of a scholar, which asks only for sufficient evidence, that his 31 years of devotion had not been wasted. They had been incomplete. The progenitors he had served were not unified architects of a perfect design. They were a civilization that argued, divided, and left each other with the consequences of their disagreements, the way all civilizations do. He picked up a piece of chalk from the table. He always kept chalk nearby, the way other men kept weapons. And he walked up the stairs to his classroom and stood before the surviving section of the hull panel chalkboard and wrote, in the progenitor script he had spent 31 years learning to read, the word Vaethi had embedded in the kill switch encoding. The word the counter-substrate's architecture was designed to make permanently unspeakable. The word for this ends when the people it serves decide it ends. He stood there for a long time with the chalk in his hand and the rain coming through the gap in the wall and the new grasses visible through the broken section. Then he turned and looked at Tessith and Elara, who had followed him up the stairs and stood in the doorway of the ruined classroom. He said, "We have 11 weeks. Teach me everything you know about the counter-substrate's revocation range. If we can get Naveen Kess the word he is already reaching for, he can speak it from inside the fragment's own network. One voice in the right place at the right moment." And the older god, the one that had fled rather than accept an ending, pulsed in its amber crystal in the hold of the permanence, patient and absolute, waiting for the last voice that could answer it to go silent. It did not know about the chalk. It had never understood chalk. The progenitors who built the counter-substrate had designed against every weapon in their own arsenal. They had not designed against a man in a ruined classroom writing the word for ending on a wall that was open to the rain.